Hello everyone, my name is Steve van Weijer. I'm a researcher at the NSCR, that's the Netherlands Institute for the Study of Crime and Law Enforcement. And today I'll present a little bit about our research I'm currently working on about the criminal behavior of family members of Dutch cybercriminals. I've got a background in life course criminology, and what we life course criminologists study is how criminal behavior develops during one's life course and how life events during that life course, like getting employment, getting married, parenthood, divorce, how such life events influence someone's involvement in antisocial or criminal behavior. One thing I'm particularly interested in is whether such results we find for traditional crime also apply or are generalizable to cybercrime. Because as you probably know, cybercrime rates has increased rapidly during the last couple of decades and has become part of our everyday life now. But we do not know as much about cybercriminals as that we know about traditional criminals. And one important question that remains is whether traditional criminals and cybercriminals are two different groups of criminals, or whether we actually see a shift from traditional crime to cybercrime, meaning that those who used to commit traditional offenses now just use the IT to commit their crimes in the cyber world. So that's an important question for us criminologists, because if this second is true, that will mean that we can use the same theories that we use for traditional criminals also for cyber criminals, and that our results about traditional offending might be generalizable to cybercrime offending. While when the former is true, we might need new theories specifically for cyber criminals and probably also interventions to stop involvement in cyber criminal behavior. So the last couple of years, there's more studies going on this topic. The human factor in cybercrime is getting more attention. However, one topic that we know almost nothing about is the family background of cybercriminals. As you can imagine, one's family can have a huge impact on your own behavior and also on your antisocial or criminal behavior. And studies on traditional criminals have also shown that family factors play an important role in explaining criminal behavior. And one of the most consistent findings that we see is that crime tends to concentrate within families. So this is a picture from one of my earlier studies on just crime in general, so traditional criminal behavior. And what we see here in the green line shows to what extent traditional crime tends to concentrate within families. So here we see that 10% of the families is responsible for about 65% of all convictions within a sample, and 20% of the families is already responsible for 80% of all crime, which just shows that criminal behavior really strongly concentrates within families. And this is not only found for the Netherlands, which I studied, but also in America, United States, United Kingdom, and all other countries. So it's a universal finding. So we know that if you have a criminal parent, you have about more than twice the odds to become a criminal yourself. It's true for both fathers as mothers, but also for siblings. So all family members' offending behavior is associated with someone's own criminal behavior. But we do not know whether the same is true for cyber criminals. Do those people who have a traditional offender as a father or as a mother, are they also more likely to engage in cybercrime? It's not been studied before, so we do not know whether this intergenerational transmission of crime also occurs among cybercrime criminals. So that's what I'm going to study in a current study. There are a couple of mechanisms that might explain why criminal behavior is transmitted from one generation to the next, why crime concentrates within families. I'll discuss a couple of them and also talk about whether this also applies for cybercrime or not. So first possible mechanism behind intergenerational transmission of crime is that of social learning. which basically says that children observe and imitate the parents, so they learn the behavior of the parents, and then they can perform the behavior themselves. You can imagine that if a child is exposed to a lot of violence in his family, he might learn and imitate the behavior themselves. I think that's an appropriate way to solve conflicts, and he's going to show violent behavior himself. Well, there's also is a case for cybercrime. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think that if a father, for example, is a cyber criminal and he commits crimes behind his computer, this might be less visible for the child. So I don't think there will often be one-on-one a child observing his father performing a hack, for example. But still, what might be learned from children from their criminal parents is a more general antisocial attitude or motives to commit crimes. And if a child learns those from his or her parents, he might be more likely to engage in either traditional or in cybercrime. So then there might again be intergenerational transmission of crime. Secondly, there might be genetic factors that increase the risk of someone to engage in antisocial or criminal behavior. Dozens of twin and adoption studies have shown that genetic factors play an important role in explaining basically every human behavior, but also antisocial, aggressive, or criminal behavior. Less is known about genetic influences on online behavior, but since every human behavior is influenced by genes, likely online behavior as well. But we do not know whether the same genetic factors that are associated with traditional criminal behavior, offline criminal behavior, are also associated with online criminal behavior. If that is the case, so if certain genetic factors both lead to offline as online criminal behavior, then you might expect to see that cybercriminals also are more likely to have criminal family members or criminal siblings because they share 50% of the same genes. Moreover, another mechanism that's often mentioned is what we call the cycle of deprivation, which basically means that there are a lot of risk factors within families that are transmitted from generation to generation to generation, which leads to a cycle of deprivation. Well, such risk factors can be poverty, living in bad neighborhoods, high school dropout, teenage parenthood, maltreatment, unemployment, all kinds of risk factors that we know that are associated with traditional family. You have a less clear picture whether the same risk factors also lead to an increased risk on cyber criminal behavior. But if that is the case, then you would expect to see that traditional criminals are also more likely to have a cyber criminal as a child. And finally, because most of the studies focusing on this concentration of crime within families focus on conviction data, on data of arrests from the police, there might be something that we call the official bias from law enforcement. So, for example, if your family members are criminal and the police knows about that, they might monitor your household more intensively because they know there's a lot of criminal activity going on over there. It also means that if you commit a crime, you might be more likely to get caught for it. While someone who doesn't have a criminal family member, which are not known by the police, when he commits a crime, he might have a smaller risk to be caught for his crime because the police doesn't monitor his family that much. Now, I'm not really sure whether this also applies to cybercrime because I can imagine the police monitoring certain neighborhoods or families in the offline world, but I don't think they then also monitor the behavior of those people in the cyber world. So I don't think this mechanism really applies in this case. So to study whether crime is also concentrated within families of cyber criminals, I use a sample of more than 1,000 hackers who were prosecuted for computer trespassing this century. So computer trespassing is basically illegally entering someone else's computer. So we have more than thousands of them, and I match them with an equal number of traditional criminals and an equal number of non-criminals, and they are matched based on their gender, country of birth, and the year of birth. And well, most of them are males, most of them are born in the Netherlands, because we look at prosecutions in the Netherlands, but the date of birth varies across them. And by matching on those three background characteristics, you automatically control for them. And then the preliminary results, I'm still working on it, but the picture is pretty clear already, shows that what we also see in a lot of other studies, that traditional criminals are more likely to have a criminal father, mother, or sibling compared to the non-criminals. However, we also see the same for cyber criminals. Also, they are more likely to have criminal family members compared to the non-criminals. But when we make the comparison between the traditional criminals and the cyber criminals, we don't see a difference between their family member offending anymore. They're equally likely to have criminal father, mother, or sibling. So, although there are still preliminary results, the conclusion seems to be that cyber criminals resemble traditional criminals with respect to their family background, with respect to criminal behavior of family members. However, we should keep in mind we're only looking at data from people who get caught by the police and who are prosecuted. I can imagine that cyber criminals who stay away from the police, who don't get caught, that they might be a different type of cyber criminals, maybe more intelligent. And in that case, they might also have a different family background. So keep in mind, you only look at those who get prosecuted. And well, it's hard to examine this because then you need data also of those who didn't get caught but who self-report engagement in hacking activity, and we don't have a lot of data for that yet. And the second thing that's important to mention is that we only look at hacking, only at computer trespassing, but of course there are a lot of other cyber crimes for which someone can also be convicted, but it's not a separate criminal act in the Dutch book of law, so we can't filter them out of the data. For example, if you threat someone online or commit online consumer fraud or identity fraud, it's not that easily to pick it out of the data based on the specific criminal act. So we only focus on hackers here, but of course we don't know whether this applies to other cyber criminals who might have committed other crimes. That's an important and interesting topic for future research. So that's all for today. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions or suggestions, please contact me at my email or Twitter.